Fantasy Fiction Friday. My name is Genevieve Gravel. My friends call me Gigi. I hope you'll be my friend. So we are on part 2 of Christina's Tale in Ladies of the Lily, which is an anthology of short stories that follow the dystopian descent of a fairy colony. Christina's Tale, like we went over in part 1, it is the longest story in the series, in the anthology. And there are certain parts of this book that I'm not going to be able to read to you, so I'm going to skip over those. But it is available on KU, and it is also available in paperback on my author page on Amazon. So let's get into, just give you a quick recap. Christina is the daughter of the king by way of an extramarital affair. And she has been raised not knowing who her parents are, and she was raised to marry her half-brother and become one day queen. And so now she's married, and her husband Bernard has a boyfriend, and she likes her husband's boyfriend very, very much because she's not really into her brother. And the king asked them to arrange the first Olympic-style games, in which her and the ladies of the Lily do. But they decide, because the king said women can't compete, that pissed them off. So they decided that they would make the games extra brutal and force the men to compete in the nude. Fun fact, the very, very first Olympic Games in Greece, the competitors did compete in the nude, so that was my muse for that. And you'll find that every single one of these stories does have an historical muse to it if you are a fan of history, particularly ancient history and European history. Okay, let's get into it. Christina's Tale, Part 2. Bernard's and my arrangement with Sean continued throughout the 2 years it took to arrange the events. Each month would pass. Every 28 days, my menstrual cycle would come, like a clock, with certainty. My personal doctor had suggested we try not only once or twice a week, as had become customary, but every day for the 2 weeks leading up to my menstruation. Now, we would lounge and laugh as we played card games and gossiped. However, every day, Sean hated the idea. I couldn't blame him. I was stealing half the time he had to spend with his beloved, and we had become great friends, the three of us. And their inside jokes had become our inside jokes, and our time together became pleasurable and happy moments shared between the best of friends. But still, they were in love, and they deserved to have intimacy without me. Now, I tried everything to conceive. I tried standing on my head, refusing to pee or bathe afterwards, but nothing worked. I was beginning to think it was never going to happen. If their love remained consistent, constant, I wanted what they had, and I told them so. They did their best to comfort and reassure me. Best of friends or not, I was still a strange bedfellow, impeding on their time. If only I could produce a son. Now, I had taken several of my own, but none of them were like Bernard and Sean. Not that many men were as captivatingly beautiful as they were. The ladies of the Lily decided to call the games Agnosis. Again, we stated the reason being the sport in and of itself was to prove one's masculinity. With a culture rooted in physical brutality, there was no better way to prove a man's worth than to endure agony. Truth be told, the women of this time had a secreted and hushed resentment toward the menfolk, and I included, desired to see them writhe in agony. As even those of the higher branches had been forced to face agony in many ways that affected our daily lives, so now would our oppressors. And it brought me delight to be the infliction of it, and they none the wiser. The excitement was palpable. It reverberated in the walls and emanated from the Fae. I fluttered just over the ground to center stage, dressed in a white gown. I had chosen to forego my corset and pinafore. My white gown flowed across from a single shoulder to my feet, freely draping around every curve of my body. My arms were covered in matching white lace, allowing pops of flesh to show through. It was quite the scandal. My seamstress would be in high demand after the games ended as a result. So I stood in front of the stone statue of King Christopher. It was exquisite, carved in a single slab of marble. His own gown draped over his shoulder, his wings painted the brightest hues out of the finest dyes. We commissioned it just for this occasion. Our years of planning had come to fruition, and all eyes were on me. I lived for that moment. I took a horn and shouted into it. It magnified my voice to a level so that all could hear, including those who weren't in attendance. Let the games begin. And I looked with pride to the stands filled with Fae, all dressed in their finest fashion. The sounds of their prideful cheers reverberated through me. The contestants took to the field below, between the roots of the great oak where the grass did not grow tall. They entered in their full glory. Oohs and ahs came from the crowd above. We stood looking down and sat with binoculars to help us watch. The wranglers brought out the cages of bees, and the contestants all jeered, pumping their arms in the air, and cheers rose from the crowd as the bees were set free. Now there had been 6 contestants in all. My eyes locked to one. He wore his long, light blue hair free-flowing, and he leapt onto the back of the bee of his choice. And as they rose into the air, it was hard to track. Even through my binoculars, his skin and wingspan blended in with the blues and whites of the sky. It was only when he spent time on the bee's back through the branches and the leaves of the oak that he was clearly visible. The bee rider's challenge, it had been called. His bee had become highly agitated and tried to thrust him, spinning and diving, and another rider had been flung from his bee, and he fought to catch himself mid-air when the bee charged him, stinging him, and they both fell to the ground, dead. Sounds of shock came from the crowd. The blue rider wrangled his bee into submission. He landed it on the ground, keeping hold of its wings with a single hand and the other fist pumping in the air. I learned that night that the Blue Rider's name was Braden. He had won the first round on the first day of our inaugural games, and I found myself more enthralled with watching him than any other contestant, as most of the other Fae did. On the second day, I wore a gown of similar design, this time in yellow. It was bee leaping. Braden flipped onto the back of a bee mid-air, grabbed its antenna, and flipped the bee over. With his hands on the insect's wings and his foot lodged into the back, he ripped the wings off and fluttered to the ground below and held the wings up in victory, and the crowd erupted. Now, each game ended with the players' marks kept on a scoreboard in the commons and an extravagant party, with a different band playing into the early morning hours. Now, the contestants had been invited, of course, but most did not attend the parties, choosing to rest or tend to the wounds. I found myself looking for Braden. We had not yet met. I planned to rectify that. He was 2 for 2 so far and favored to be the grand champion. His name and tales of his acts were on the tips of everyone's tongues, and by the sounds of it, was not the only Fae enamored with him. I overheard some men criticizing him, saying what they would have done if they could have. Braden's abilities were unmatched and unbelievable. While the upper branches and members of the court stayed awake all night drinking wine and ale, down below, the workers cleaned and readied for the next day's games. In order to round up the insects used in the actual games, as well as for practice, a group of lower middle branch fae were employed to build the cages, hunt the insect, and care for them until such time as the insect would be unleashed for public entertainment. Now, one girl, the daughter of a wrangler, would often feed the insects. She took favor to the creatures, going so far as to name them. I watched her. She was young, too young to be working with live bees, I thought. But she apprenticed under her father's and brother's tutelage, so it was their problem, not mine. Still, she was a lovely little thing, perhaps of 8. She wore black bow ties and her long yellow hair, and she looked so innocent. I wondered if I had ever been that innocent. I watched from a window above. The joyful songs played behind me as she cleaned the playing fields and disposed of the corpses of the fallen insects. The girl looked broken-hearted, with tears staining her face as she stood over the grave of all those fallen insects in her little black dress. She fell to her knees and covered her face with her hands as her father set them ablaze. But I couldn't care. More so, I didn't understand. They were just bees. Kill them. Let the girl cry. The games were my life, my joy, my passion. The third day ushered in the branch battle. As most eyes were on Braden as he took to climbing. I sounded the horn, and the hand-to-hand battle began. The players used sticks and twigs they either ripped from the branch or found on the grounds. Either was legal. Braden ripped from his branch with brute force, while the other 4 competitors chose to loot their weapons from the ground below. Returning to the battle branch, at one time 3 thrushed and lunged to Braden at the same time, an attempt to obliterate the main competition, as only one would be deemed the winner. He dodged their attacks, leaping over his opponent and landing behind one of them and thrusting the stick into his back, forcing him to fall and be eliminated. Braden was the final to be left standing, though, bloodied, covered in deep lacerations, but 3 for 3. It seemed as if the Blue Rider could not lose. Finishing the week of the games was the crowd favorite, the origin of the games. Tennis. And Braden, of course, won with grace and ease. 4 for 4. In the center of the courtyard, in front of the statue of the King Christopher, where the games had begun only a week prior, I approached the grand champion, Braden. I was struck stupid by the beauty of his eyes, one crystal white and the other sparkling blue. His muscular form shone under the shimmer of sweat that glistened in the evening sky's last rays of light. His hair flowed to his firm in shades of white and silver with streaks of light blues. Oh, he was the most beautiful man to ever grace my sight, and he stood in front of me, bending over so I could reach, placing a crown of thorns on his head, declaring him grand champion. His gaze locked mine, and my mouth watered. I couldn't look away as he held my gaze, and thunderous applause filled the night air. The party to commemorate the games. Laughter, song, dance, food, and drink. The grand champion approached me, wearing slacks that highlighted everything I'd already seen. We had all seen how blessed he had been. His shirt's tight on his pecs, and his brocade vest tied on his hard chest, and he knelt before me, kissing the back of my hand, holding my gaze once again. I could stare into those eyes for eternity. My princess, he whispered in a low baritone voice that shook me to my core, and I squirmed in my seat, repositioning myself, trying to hide the vibrations coming from within. Bernard, my husband, looked at me with a smile, a wink, and a slight nod. He knew what I was thinking. He saw the beauty in Braden as well. It was undeniable that Bernard approved. Perhaps you can join me for tea tomorrow to discuss next year's games, I responded. It had been more of a command than a question. My time is yours, my princess, Braden replied, sending tingles down my spine. My time is yours, my princess, Braden replied, sending tingles down my spine and up my thighs. The way he called me his princess. His was the most erotic sound to pass my hearing, and I wanted more. Braden was nearly an hour early for tea. Now, propriety would make him wait. I didn't want to wait. Propriety be damned. I wanted him next to me in my presence. I wanted to gaze into his eyes, to hear his deep voice blink at me. I made him wait. It was agony. I gave my servant girl the remainder of the day off, just after she served us tea. I treat my servants well. We sat and talked. After all, that was the excuse I'd given him to get him here in my room. We discussed what worked and what we could improve on for the next year's games. When the conversation would find an organic end, I would find something more to say just to keep him engaged. The day turned to night. The sunlight faded from my window, casting a soft orange hue that slowly faded to black. And lighting a candle, I said, I fear I've kept you all day. I should let you go now. My time is yours to take, my princess, and there it was again, mine. Yes, I was his. And he took my hand, kissed it. Keeping his grip, I put his hand to my face and leaned into it. That's another part. You're just gonna have to buy the book. Sorry. The sun was beginning to rise. We'd been up all night. My servant girl will be here soon to prepare me for the day. You cannot be here. Rumors may fly, and fly quickly. Discretion is of the top importance, I told him on the edge of sleep. Then I'll hide under your bed or in your closet. Anywhere, as long as you are near, he nestled into me. I had fallen in love. I believe he had too. The love that I had dreamt of. The desire, the devotion, it was all there in his arms, in his eyes. I had to say my goodbyes. Return to me tonight, another command I posed as a question. If it pleases you, he responded. You please me, I said. Throwing myself on the settee, rubbing my eyes, puffy, bloated, and rimmed with dark circles. I'm so tired, I cried. You, Bernard said with a hint of glee, maybe too much excitement than was called for. But he was happy for me. He was truly my best friend, and I responded with a slight smile. Do tell, he requested. I think I'm in love. I swirled a small tendril of my hair around my index finger. I want him to be my personal guard. Good idea, Bernard responded. He knew as well as I, a woman could not openly take a lover as he could. We had talked about Sean before. I had suggested he come out when he was king, and his word would be law, and as long as I had produced the next king to the throne, no one would care. But for me, it was different. The hypocrisy between the sexes consumed our society. I can put laws into place, but I cannot change the minds of men, Bernard had protested. You don't know how men speak when it's not in mixed company. A woman loving a woman is one thing, it's hot, fetishized. But a man loving another man makes us lower than women. We're reduced to women who cannot produce, worthless, misunderstood outcasts, weird jokes. No laws are going to make the men of the great oak accept us. John will never be out as my lover. I love him too much to expose him to that, Bernard said. I had wanted to be offended. I had wanted to be offended at the worthlessness to society. If I could not produce, I was offended. Bernard's words felt like sharp blades piercing my skin. It was true, though. If I could not produce a son, I was worthless, and I would be outcast and replaced. Not that Bernard could impregnate a woman. We disgusted him. And that night I asked Braden, in the softness of the bed covered in sweat, if he would be open to becoming a member of the Royal Guard. If it pleases you, it pleases me, was his response. He served me well. It pleases me, I responded. And so it came to be. Braden was my personal guard, having an excuse to spend his nights with me. And when we parted, it was only because he had training for next year's games. After all, he was the reigning grand champion. And he was mine. All mine. And I was his. His princess. And thoughts of what I had kept him from and my own selfishness, it weighed heavy on me. Thoughts of what I had kept him from and my own selfishness weighed heavy on me. I had kept him close and used him for my pleasure for nearly a year. And not once had he complained or asked for more, but I was holding him back. I could give him my love, my body, my mind, but I could never give him my hand, nor a child or a family of his own. With me, he would forever be the invisible one. It wasn't fair. Not to me. Not to him. I was to be queen. I had to put the realm first. The community, my wants, my hopes, my dreams were of no consequences as long as I did not act on them, but of great consequence if I did. I had to stop putting that on him. It was far too much to expect out of love and respect. I could not ask this of him. It wasn't fair, especially since I was finally producing the next king. My belly had grown to a considerable size, but that did not sway him. He took care of me and denied me nothing. How could I deny him a chance to live a rich, full life with a family and a true wife? You could have a family, a wife, children. I'm holding you back, withholding joy from your life. I cried into his arms. You are my life. You are my joy. I know I can never take you as my wife. I would sacrifice my right hand for a smile from you. Anything you wish for, I would give to you. I'm not living. So if you want me to go, you have to say so. Go ahead, send me away. Only then will you be stealing my joy. You are the air that I breathe, and no matter what, I will never stop loving you. I will love you with my dying breath and from beyond the grave. I belong to you, my princess. He buried his lap. His head buried in my lap. Tears stained his face. I had hurt him with my suggestion that I let him go. I would never try that again. He too would become my life, my love, my joy, my every breath. And not but a few hours after crowning Braden for a second year as grand champion at the party, I almost didn't attend. Fatigue blanketed me, and I found it hard to breathe with my ever-expanding tummy. I found myself in labor. And a son was born that night, one with crystal white eyes, the other steel blue and pale blue skin. He was the mirror image of Braden. and Bernard declared him prince to the realm, naming him Bernard III. And the baby was placed in the bed between Bernard and I. Braden stood at the door. Bernard looked at him as he spoke. My son will one day be crowned king. No one will ever question his legitimacy. There was an unspoken understanding between the two men, the two loves of my life. With the birth of the prince, Bernard and I entered into a second vow of secrecy. Thank you so much for joining me today on Fantasy Fiction Friday as we completed Christina's tale. Next time we are going to go into the rule of Bernard III, the little baby that was just born, in the tale of Q. I love the tale of Q. It's a lot of fun. There's not a lot of spice in that tale, so hopefully I can actually read the whole thing to you. So I will see you then next time on Fantasy Fiction Friday. Remember, you are valid, you are worthy, and you are loved. Okay, bye.